Emily, I think I'm going to let you kind of talk about your work a little bit, and then
Okay,
we will just jump into questions when you're ready, and you can let me know.
great, great. Well, hello, I'm Emily. I'm an artist based in Joshua Tree, California, which is in the desert. And I used to live in Portland for a long time, and so I love Oregon. I love Portland, and that's how I know Alicia. Um, and my work, let's see, the major themes in my work are fantasy, the human body, and the natural world, predominantly water. I've been really exploring water a lot in my work over the last couple of years. And can you hear me okay? Is this
I
okay?
can.
Okay, good.
I can.
But one of the things that I would say the most important part of my work is that it's really multimedia, meaning I use lots and lots of different types of materials, and I've always liked using lots of different materials. So um, I believe that each material carries with it its own language and associations. And I'm really interested in working with those and seeing what happens when you combine them. So, for example, a lot of my work is actually made with glass, a lot of it's cast glass. But then I'll incorporate things like leather, hair, piercing studs. And what interests me is when you take um, those different materials and put them together and what kind of conversation starts between them. For example, glass has a whole history of being associated with magic and fragility and preservation and science. And when you put that next to something like a piercing stud, which has this all this cultural associations to them and youth associations, and all of a sudden you have this mashup of materials and meanings. So for me, that's actually the major thread that's always gone through my work. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say. This great image on the front, it's got a bunch of pieces. These are all glass pieces. So even the ones that are solid and don't look transparent, those are also glass. There's just an opaque style glass. And one of the things, I'm a predominantly a sculptor, and I also like to do installation art. And installation art is when you put a whole bunch of sculptures in a space and are playing around with how that changes a person's experience of the space and how those pieces relate to one another. So a lot of my work is installation based.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. We can go to this one. Oh, I like that this one that you chose is kind of closer up, and we get to see more of the detail.
Yeah, so this is an example of a cast glass installation, and this piece consisted of about 200 different cast glass elements. So this here you can see it's a cast glass crystal, and then I also made little glass plates for the pieces with a metal chain that connected them, and then they were all hanging in the gallery space in different shapes and circles. And this whole piece had a combination of things like crystals, rocks, birds, mushrooms, and apples. Actually, there are a lot of apples in the piece. Um, and I was really interested in fairy tale imagery, and so that's where a lot of those things were coming from, and also the imagery associated with transformation. So in fairy tales and folk tales, a lot of times somebody goes through a transformation. Somebody is transformed into an animal, or they eat something and they're transformed, or a space transforms. And so I've been looking at different materials and different symbols that represent transformation in those stories.
That is amazing. And we have like a couple questions coming up already that
Yeah,
normally I'd want them to wait, but since it's specifically about it, there was a
let's
question
do
on
questions.
if the hair was also glass.
No, that's a great question. It isn't. It's a combination of acrylic hair. So I buy a lot of wigs and use them in my artwork. I am a big wig customer. And so a lot of it is wig hair, so acrylic hair. And then some of it is actually horse hair. And the thing that I like about the horse hair is that it has a very glass like quality to it. So whoever picked that out, that's really perceptive of you. I think it almost looks like it could be glass because it's very thick and also somewhat transparent. And so light shines through it. And one of the things I like to do is actually dye the hair myself. So I'll, just like you would do tie dye, I'll take horsehair and acrylic hair and dye them in a big dye bath. So I get the colors are slightly more customized.
That is fabulous. And I just want to compliment you on using lots of our vocabulary words, which I really
Oh, good.
appreciate.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
um, Someone is asking, how did you form it so perfectly?
Oh, well, thank you. Um, I would say
I think maybe
in,
even like, because I think if I didn't know how glass was cast, I'd be completely confused about the process. So maybe even talking a little bit
yeah.
about like where you start and what that might look like. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, no, no. I think that's great. Well, I think I do a lot of mold making. I think this also answers the question. I do a lot of mold making, and mold making is when you take an object and you cover it in like a rubber material, and when you remove it, you have a mold of that form, like an ice cube tray. Essentially, it's like making. You could make. Imagine you could make ice cube trays of almost anything. And so one of the things I did is I actually made molds of crystal, of real crystals, and then I had all these pieces that looked just like real crystals that I could then manipulate and work with. And so after backing up a little bit, after I make a mold of something, then I pour wax into the mold. And then when I remove the mold, I have a nice wax version of whatever it is I was using. So I'll have a whole bunch of wax crystals or a whole bunch of wax mushrooms. And then the great thing about wax is you can cut it, you can melt it, you can fuse it together with other wax forms. So I'll take all these wax crystals and fuse them together, kind of mush them together, like you would with clay almost. They almost become like a clay. Um, and so once I have the form that I like, I'll make another mold over that, which is with different materials like plaster and silica. I drain out all the wax and then I put that plaster silica form in a kiln like you would ceramics. I don't know if anybody's in a ceramics class or has taken one. So you put that into a kiln just like you would ceramics, and then I put chunks of glass in it. The glass melts into the form, cools down, and solidifies, and then I take it out, break off the plaster silica mold, and then you have this glass object. So the reason a lot of the forms look very much like real life forms, like the crystal looks like a real crystal, is because the original form came from a real crystal. Does that kind of answer the question? I know it's hard without visuals. But that process is actually called a lost wax process, and that's how they make bronze sculptures too. And they've been using that process. People have been using that process for hundreds of years. So any of the big bronze sculptures that you see, like public sculptures, or you see in sculpture history, those are all done by carving a wax and then making a mold of it and then pouring in the bronze. But the difference is I pour in glass.
That is
Cool.
awesome and super helpful. Thank you. All right, so let's jump into process questions. Kale, you want to jump in here and read for us?
Yeah. So the first question is, how do you make your art? And I think
Which
you
you
just
already,
answered that.
yeah.
Second question is, were there any specific ways you learned art that might have been different than just practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually worked as an intern for a lot of different artists. When I was in high school and middle school, we didn't have any arts programming. And so what I did is I did a lot of internships all over the town that I lived in, the city that I lived in. And that means that you're helping another artist with their work. So one of the things I did is I actually worked for a costume designer. Remember I said I liked working with all different materials? So lots of different materials, but I actually was an intern for a costume designer at a theater in San Diego where I grew up. And I helped them make the costumes, and it's an unpaid position, but it's just you're paid in experience. And so I did that. I worked for, same thing, I interned for a glass artist. Although that's not where I learned how to do glass, I just helped them in their studios. And I would say the time that I spent helping other artists in their studios, doing things like cataloging work, packaging work, all the labor, the boring labor stuff. I learned so much about just the business of being an artist, and also just the little just it was a great window into what it means to be a professional artist and learn about lots of different materials. So that was, I would say, how I learned outside of just working in the studio.
That was cool. Yeah. Uh, how old were you when you started making art?
You know what? I've actually always loved making art. So I would say since I was probably like 3 or 4, I would just take whatever I could find. And I've always liked collage because I love working with lots of different materials. So I would just take um, leaves and spools of thread and glue them together, or draw on scraps of paper. So I've just always loved art.
Sorry, I couldn't get my mic on. What materials do you use?
So the main materials that I use are glass and hair, I guess, which is it's a weird thing to say, but the main material I use is glass, but I also bring in lots of different materials. My education is actually in uh, fibers, which is fabric, and dyeing and weaving and sewing. So I'm really familiar with sewing, fabric, working with leather, all that kind of stuff that kind of falls into this fiber textiles realm, this kind of soft material that you might use to make clothing or home goods. And and then on top of that, I've added in glass, and I use like paper clay that you can get at the art store, paper mache. I would say paper mache is my other main material. I love paper mache. I've been doing a lot of paper mache projects during quarantine because I get all this newspaper junk mail, and so I love being able to turn all the junk mail into art projects. Um, but really, whatever I can. My mom says whatever I can get my hands on, I would say.
What is your favorite part of your art making process?
Um, my favorite part is the moment where you really get to play with materials and really see how things relate to each other. I think it comes back to that idea of collage. You know, when you have lots of materials and you get to just kind of sort them and see how they go together, and learn things about them. You know, like you might not have expected two images to go together. I don't know if you guys have done collage in your class. But you might not have expected two images or two objects to go together, and they do. And so that's my favorite part. And a lot of my process involves um, building structures, and just the brass tacks of making something come into reality and making it stable, and making an armature. But then my favorite part is when I get to add things on top of that and collage and play. So it's really that moment of uh, is it like discovery, I guess, that you wouldn't expect things to, and you learn things. So it's a conversation. These
Awesome.
are great questions.
Thank you.
They're tough though. I looked through the presentation before, and some of them are pretty heavy duty questions.
That's why I wanted to send them to you ahead of time, because I'm like, I would want to think about these things a little bit before I tried to answer them.
Yeah, I thought, oh, this is thorough. But it's great.
Yeah, and they came up with the questions, so great job,
Awesome. They're great.
everybody. Joseph, do you want to next and read the purpose questions?
When did you decide you want to be an artist?
I think I decided I wanted to be an artist in 9th grade. I think the summer between 8th grade and 9th grade, I took an art class and realized that some people did art as their profession, and decided that that's what I wanted to do. But I've always loved making things. But I think it was at that moment, at some point in like between middle school and high school that it really set in for me.
What does your art do for you?
You know, for me, my art, like I said, it's a way to play and explore, but it's also, you know, you can make art when you're in any kind of mood. You can make art when you're in a great mood and you're excited, or you're depressed or angry. And I think my art has always been a way for me to get out how I feel, or even it feels kind of meditational. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that concept, but just it's like a way for me to just like get in the zone, and doesn't matter what else is going on in the world. I can just sit there and play with materials, and really enjoy what it. I'm a very tactile person, and so I really enjoy the feeling of just mushing something in my hands. But I know when I decided I wanted to be an artist in about eighth or ninth grade, I was actually pretty unhappy at the time, and so it felt like a way for me to express myself when people weren't listening to me. Whether or not anybody else saw that, I made me feel like I had a voice, and so I think it's carried through.
What is your inspiration to make this type of art?
There's so many amazing artists in art history and contemporary artists working now that's what always gets me really excited. That and reading books, actually. Whenever I read a new book, I get all these ideas. So right now I've been reading a lot of science fiction, and so I've been getting a lot of like just images from science fiction that I've been interested in, or reading a lot about nature. I'm always inspired by nature, kind of the weird, unexpected forms that you see in nature. So I would say reading nature, and then also just inspired by community and what other people are doing.
What made you want to be an artist and why?
I think I've always really enjoyed making art, and so for me, it's always been a good place for me to be, and so I've just always wanted to keep doing it, and yeah, so it's always felt really good for me, and yeah, it's an opportunity for me to share how I view the world, or spend time thinking about different themes. You know, if there's like some crazy looking spider that I saw a picture of, I can spend time thinking about that crazy spider, and the colors of the spider, and by making a version of it, you know, and so it's an opportunity to really spend time with whatever you want to.
What is the point and purpose of your art?
I mean, I hope that when people see my artwork, it connects to something in them that I don't know if it makes sense to them in some ways, but I do know that my work is not going to, not everybody is going to like my artwork, and that's fine. And it's not going to connect with everybody, but I do think it connects with some people, and for me, that's really exciting. I also think that there's something that you can express through materials and color and texture that you can't really say. Just like poetry, there are things that you can't draw that you can only do with poetry. I think it's the same with visual art. There are things that you can express just by putting different objects together that you wouldn't be able to say otherwise.
I really appreciate you saying that. It's like thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I think it was like a year or two ago, I had found this image on Pinterest that was like a drawing of a head that had water in it. And I had sent it to you because it reminded me of your head with your water. And I just love like that contrast of like water being emotion and like your head being kind of analytical, and it just like, but then like in thinking about maybe being overwhelmed, right? Like if your head is like full of water versus like, you having things more manageable. So I really appreciate and connect with your work. And I,
Oh, thank you.
a question, I'm going to jump in and be a little selfish because like one of my questions, and this, I don't know which category it would fit in, but this feels like a good category, is like one thing I've always really enjoyed about your work and your presence as an artist is I don't see a lot of imposter syndrome from you. And I feel like,
Oh,
and this is right,
thanks.
like vulnerable moment right for me is that like I have struggled for sure with like prioritizing art in my life and like identifying as an artist and really pushing my art into the world, and obviously balancing that with my other roles as
Yeah.
a mom and an educator and a partner and a daughter and all these other things. And so
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just speak to, you know, finding your voice and making and really not and really just like trusting your artist self.
Well, that means a lot to me, by the way, that you said that. Well, I think that that's one thing that I always have to come back to is just trusting myself. I had a teacher in college who said to never try to make work that was cool, because trends come and go. And what's better is just to be following a thread. And so for me, that's really important. Like just to know that the ideas that are coming out of me are just, um, yeah, I just want to express them, and they're not being made just to look like what other people's art is made, and that or what other people's art looks like. And like I said before, like that means that sometimes your art is going to be really unfashionable, um, and off trend, and then sometimes you'll accidentally be on trend. And so I think that's really interesting to me to see. For example, in our history, there's a moment where everybody was painting really realistically, and painting the human figure, and then all of a sudden people got into abstract painting, where things were just shapes of color, in relation to one another, and both are great. But the one came into vogue, while another went out of vogue, and then they come back in again. And so I think learning that there's a constant cycle with that. And then also, this time has been really hard on everybody, with the pandemic. And so I think I've also started to think a lot about, like, well, what does it mean to be an artist in this world? And, does your art have to be made quickly? Could it be made slowly? Could it be quiet? Could it be reflective? And so I'm realizing, more and more that it's really I think, kind of a state of mind. And also, it's just by studying something, it might take you years of studying an idea and expressing it. And that's really, I think, the best, even if you're not showing pictures of it all the time. And I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm hearing like the kind of that there, and I feel this too. There's like a desire to be putting out content, right? Like
Yeah.
consistently and voluminously, to be
Yes.
like, here's a thing, like go, 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 right? And giving yourself permission to go at your own speed and cycle. And that's actually something that our last artist talked about, was that she went in like these kind of cycles of making,
Oh, interesting.
which for me, I don't know if you're a Julia Cameron fan, right? But for me, I definitely like have tried to do the like making art every day,
Oh,
piece, or
yeah.
like at least every week, to like treat it like a job, right? And Julie Cameron, because she wrote The Artist's Way, right? And about
Oh,
like,
yes, yes.
yeah, and so like doing, a little bit every day and treating it like a job. And when you're talking about internships, right? I worked for Susan Harlan, who I know you have
Oh,
worked
yeah.
collaboratively. I worked with her for years, and she was very much like, make it your 40-hour a week job, like schedule it. So like I have all of these voices to my artist self that's like,
Right.
similarly to where it's like, put out the art, put out the art, put out the art, so that it's, consistent. And I think giving yourself permission to do that if it works for you, but then don't do that if it doesn't, or have a different path, is really awesome.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is there's this idea that you should always be producing, and that's what I grew up in too. And I think that I mean, that is a way to make an art career, but I also think it's just as legitimate to raise a family and have a contemplative process that builds on itself for years. And one of the things that I find really inspirational is just reading about other artists. And because there's so many different paths people have gone on. And so I think that that's always really nice to see that there's something for everybody. I mean, there's nothing wrong also with like being bombastic and making a ton of art and like having a ton of like, putting a ton out there. I think the coolest thing about being an artist or an artistic person is that, and I think it's really important right now to remember, is that we're cultural creators. We don't need to be cultural consumers. So instead of just consuming all the images that we see on Instagram or on social media or on the internet, also thinking about like, well, how can I put out content, or like, how can I really find the source of this image and learn from it. And so inserting yourself in there and knowing you have the power to create content, I think is really empowering.
Well, and I would say it surprises me too, because your list of accomplishments are vast.
Oh,
So like I was like, when I was, looking at your stuff like a few months back when we started talking about you coming to the class, I was like I knew you had been a lot of places and I knew you had done a lot of stuff, but your CV is extensive.
Oh.
I started telling my students what a CV was, and it was really fun. So yeah, so that, I mean, yes, I am continually impressed. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
Well,
And that kind of,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So much of it is people, I would say. I have friends from college or friends even from high school, and when they have, they end up doing something cool and then they invite you to be in it. I would say the two things that I've learned about having a professional career is one, to show up on time, to always have your work, to be organized, show up on time and be polite. And then the other thing, and know that like people come back into your life. So you don't want to be, you want to be nice just to be nice to people, but also like you probably meet that person again, and it's just people and it's relationships in a positive way. And then the other thing is that an artist I know said this thing that really rings true for me, where he said that he applied for everything for like 10 years. And then after about 10 years, he started getting invited to stuff. And so I would say the same thing's been my experience, where I've just applied for everything, put myself out there. And you meet a lot of people that way, but applied for everything. And then there's been like a turn where I've started getting invited to stuff. So it's really, it's a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's all people, I would say.
That's encouraging. Nice. I might have to hire you for some like encouragement on the applying for things, because I definitely have nervousness around that. So, someone's at the door.
Well, I have something to say about that too. Another teacher of mine told me that if you apply for 10 things, you get one thing. So the amount of rejection I get is amazing. But I just don't even worry about it, because you just never know what that gallery or that curator is looking for, and it usually doesn't necessarily have to do with you. There's something else going on. And so, maybe they're taking their show in a different direction, but they'll remember your work the next time they're putting something together. And so it's good to just like put yourself out there. And I get rejection letters and I just move on. I don't read them. I know some artists save them. I don't save them. I just keep moving. But yeah, I apply for like 10, and actually I would say I apply for like 12 or 15 things and I get one, is really my ratio.
That's helpful.
How often do you practice your art?
So I try to make work every day, but that doesn't realistically happen. So I would say about once a week. I try to at least get into the studio once a week. But sometimes I have more time. Like if you're on summer vacation, you have a lot of time that you can prioritize, or winter break, you have a lot of time you can prioritize. And then sometimes it's just, every other evening. So I try to just, go with the flow of when I have time, but also really stick to that. So sometimes I'll say, okay, every Thursday, Friday are going to be studio days, and I'm just going to dedicate those to studio days. I'm not going to pick up my phone, nothing. And sometimes you're lucky enough to have 2 days a week or 2 nights a week, and sometimes, it's just like you're doodling in between classes or something. So it ranges, but I try to, whenever there's an opportunity to be in the studio a lot, I try to really schedule myself in. I think we've missed number 1 and 2, which is my fault because I didn't say what number we were on.
I apologize for running out there and swearing on recorded video. Last time my dog got around my chickens, my chicken literally flew over the run into the neighbor's yard. So that was really scary. Sorry.
Oh my gosh. Oh no.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Oh, thank you so much.
I've seen movies. I think I've seen so many movies in my life.
Oh, thank you for sharing
Thousands,
that piece.
hundreds. I don't know.
Okay. Kale, do you want to keep reading, or do you want me to cover the rest of these questions?
No, I can do
Okay.
4 and 5. What is the hardest thing you have made?
I would say that installation that was on the presentation in the beginning, where I said it had 200 of those hanging pieces. That was definitely the hardest. It was a lot of work and a lot of just project planning. You're talking about like how often do you practice, and that was like just every night after work, going into the studio and making work for months, with the idea that it was all gonna become this one big piece. So it was a lot of planning. It wasn't necessarily like going into the studio and just doing whatever I felt like. It was a lot of like, this is your task for the evening. So, but it really, I also was really happy with it in the end because of that.
Gosh, I hate it when I can't hit my mic. Number 5, what is your favorite art project you have done?
I would say it's that same one, that really big one, because it was the biggest thing I'd taken on, and it really was nice to see all that work and planning towards one thing coming together. So it was a big moment for me to see all that coming together, and it was definitely the biggest installation I've done. It was, I think the room that it was in, that it filled up, was about 20 feet by 20 feet. So it was a really huge space. The cool thing about that, though, is I did it at a school and at a college, and a bunch of the college students helped me install it. So that was a great experience. That was the other thing about it that made it so nice, is I got to work with all these college students, and they helped me put it together.
Did they get extra credit? Because I got a lot of extra credit in college helping my professors put their art installations together.
They probably did. Nobody told me, but they probably were getting credit for it. Actually, now that you mention it, there's probably a reason they were helping me.
That's awesome. All right. What advice do you have for future artists?
I would say whatever really interests you, really get at the heart of it. So if you love an artist that if you love an artist that is an anime artist, who's got all this cool I'm just making this up, but if you had like this artist that you loved who did all this kind of like anime magical work, and they're based in Japan, then do a lot of research and find out what where their work is coming from. Like, what Japanese folk tales are they channeling into their work? Or if there's an artist that, I'm gonna use a spider reference again, if there's an artist that does really cool spider fashion, like things that feel a little bit inspired by fashion, by spiders or Day of the Dead, then research that and really get at the heart of it. Because it's always better to really look at the source of something than look at what somebody else made with it and try to make something inspired by that person. It's always better to kind of like go back to the original source. Does that make sense? And the great thing is with the internet now, you can really do that. And I think that's one of the best things. So I love researching topics, and if you're inspired by people who are inspired by nature, look at pictures of nature and figure out what really excites you. And so then really follow that thread and apply for everything, and don't let rejection get in your way. It doesn't matter.
I don't like rejection. I don't think any of us do, but
no, but it's hard. It's hard. It's really hard to just get used to being, I think it's hard to get used to being rejected, but just not taking it personally and just moving forward. If you want to show your work, you just have to get used to it and know that it's not about you. But that's a really painful thing to learn.
It is, but I feel like I've done that with job applications, and I was like, well, I have to get a job, so I might like. I'm gonna...
Exactly, and it's just they might just not be hiring people that day.
Right.
It's just so it's just, but I would say just apply for a lot of stuff, put yourself out there, and really research your source and figure out what is interesting to you and really interesting.
That's awesome. Let's see here. I want to give a little bit of time because I know some students, I'm sure, want to share with you. So are there any questions on this slide? So like your plans for the future or future projects, or any like new art mediums, or new, like, is there anything in the future that you want to share with us?
Actually, I'm working on a shaved ice project.
Ooh, tell us about that.
Where I'm working on, and I think it's all connected, but I'm in the next summer I'm going to launch it, and I have a shaved ice machine, and I want to make like a sculptural shaved ice machine, and make shaved ice as art. So that's what I'm really excited about right now.
Like snow cones?
Yeah, snow cones. Like, yeah.
Oh my God! So people could people come eat it?
Yeah, people can come eat it. Yeah, but I think it's interesting. Yeah, so I think it's interesting thinking about flavors and syrups and colors, and so I've actually gotten really excited about snow cones.
Although, like in COVID land, I'm wondering like how to do that in a sanitary way. But I'm like, you know what? I love it. Maybe by next summer it'll be better.
We'll see what next summer is like. I had planned to start the project this summer, and it just did not happen. It was like, this is not the summer for snow cones.
It's fair.
Sadly.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Okay.
Edibles hand sanitizer. That's a good suggestion.
Just diet. Awesome. Okay. Joseph, did you